Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the last day of the Lehman Conference. I hope you're having a great conference so far and that you're taking advantage of the platform, the conference platform that has opportunities for you to network and interact with others. My name is Montse Torremorell. I'm a faculty at the Swain Group at the University of Minnesota. And together with my colleagues and myself, I want to welcome you one more time to the conference. So thank you for joining us today. I hope you had fun last evening at the Zoetis reception to honor Dr. Clayton Johnson, who is this year recipient of the Lehman Science in Practice Award. It was a lot of fun. So again, Clayton, congratulations. We got to know you a little bit better, and you do have some secrets that you revealed last night. Thank you for that. And I hope this morning you were up bright and early to join the morning mindset session, No Guts, No Glory, sponsored by Merck Animal Health. It actually was very good as well. But if you could not make it, no worries. Go back to the schedule and check the video by Dr. Auburn Ellis, who guided us through a series of simple exercises to help us to stay healthy. I had never heard of eye yoga or chair yoga. And from now on, that's what I'm going to practice. No more excuses to try to stay healthy and take care of myself and all of us. We need to do that, and in particular in this age of COVID and everything else going on. I do want to remind you that if you miss any content or if you want to watch the content again, go back to the platform. It will be available until February 2021. So we still have a few months to take advantage of the great content at the Lehman Conference. Check it out. And this would not have been possible without the help of our sponsors, big and small. So thank you so much for being us this year more than ever that we had to go virtual. I also want to thank National Porvor and SHIC. They are our program partners, and we really appreciate your support. This was also the first time that we translated much of the content in the conference, both to Spanish and Portuguese. And I do want to say a big thank you to our students who did the heavy lifting and the sponsors who helped us, who came on board to help this sponsor this part of the program, the translations. If you haven't taken the flu vaccine pledge yet, please do so. Go to visit the Spencer booth, check it. So it's very important. And while you're there, make sure you look for those hidden letters that are hidden inside the sponsor booth so you can come up with a secret sentence and win some prizes. So there are cool things waiting for you, and it's fun. We also got some very, very interesting sentences. There is a lot of creativity in this group of attendees. So thank you for that. Last but not least, I want to give a big thanks to our partners at Farm Progress. Andy, Sarah, thank you so much. The production team behind the scenes, thank you for making this event possible. It would not have been possible without you to help us deliver what I think it's been an exceptional program, given the circumstances. Lastly, to the university team at the University of Minnesota, that we work the whole year. Okay, Bob used to say that it takes us 12 months to plan the conference, and that's true. So thank you for that, everybody, the faculty, the students. Everybody plays a very important role, and also our team at CCAPS, led by Rhonda Layer, who helped us with the logistics. So, with having said that, we want to move on to the program. So, and at the Lehman Conference, we always strive to learn from the best, okay? And this year, we wanted to bring you an inside view to a company whose strategy has been to add value to the business of pork production. And we'll know and we'll see why that is so important. To do so, it often means to do things differently, to think outside the box, to speak, to just try new things, okay? And to speak about this and the strategy behind, we are very honored today to have the leadership team at the HANOR company. So we have with us Myrl Mortenson. So hi, Myrl.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's very good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Myrl is president of the HANOR company, which he founded together with his partners in 1997. Myrl is by all means a visionary leader who has helped shape the global swine industry. So he has grown the HANOR operations to over 650 employees, caring for pigs in 780 farms, if I got my numbers right, that are located across 7 states. And Myrl's vision culminated in 2006 when HANOR and its partners formed Triumph Foods and later developed partnerships with Daily to complete the integrated pig production system. By adding value in final processing. So Myrl, it's very good to see you and having you with us. And we also have with us David Wade, who is the Vice President of Operations at HANOR. He's been an integral part in the growth of the operation from the beginning, managing the genetic and sow operations. Dave has a lifelong history in pig production from his family farm, working in Sun Livestock Systems, PIC, and then when joined HANOR in 1997, and he's been there since then. So, Dave, very good to see you. Thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, I can, Monse. Thank you.
Good. And lastly, we also have part of the leadership team, Dr. Tara Donovan, who is a veterinarian and Vice President of the Health Management for the HANOR company. Tara is well known to many of us, a great colleague. Tara oversees the company's healthcare programs and a team of veterinary professionals responsible for swine health across the company. I have always been very impressed with Tara and her approach to control disease, and I look forward to what she has to say. She is going to join us in just a second, but I don't want to delay the beginning of the talk. Just one last thing I do want to mention, that all of them together, they will be delivering the Morrison Lectureship. So you know that this lectureship is named after Dr. Bob Morrison in honor of his work and himself. And as Mark Greenwood reminded yesterday, Bob was a great listener, okay? And by listening, he reminded us how important it is to do work that matters for the swine industry. So having said that, Myrl, take it away. Please, everybody, join me in welcoming Myrl Mortenson to the talk today, delivering the Morrison Lectureship. Thank you.
Thank you, Monse. I appreciate the opportunity for the HANOR company of families to present to everyone today a little bit about who we are, kind of what our philosophies and concepts of modern day pork production in an integrated model, kind of what it looks like. And I want to take this opportunity also to thank all the employees inside of HANOR for all their contributions over the years that we've been together. And I did a little number yesterday. The 5 key people in my company, we've got an average of over 33 years of service together between our days in PIC and in HANOR. So we truly are a family of longevity, and it's been an integral part in the success of our company is the people. But to start off with, Dave Wade will give a little bit of the history of our company and tell you a little bit our philosophy of how we look at production and all the different venues that we're involved in. And as Monse said, we are a company who always looks at value added. We built our platform of our production system off value added concepts through multiplication and into the integrated model. We also have a company that produces antibiotic free GAP 1 pigs for Whole Foods. And so we're just in a whole array of different venues of production that adds value to the entire chain. And then Dr. Donovan will certainly follow up and talk to you about our technical aspects and how we look at things in our company. But there's one thing that I want to touch on today before I turn the venue over to these 2 people is I want to mention Dr. Lehman this morning. I was fortunate enough back in 1977 when I first started in this business to become aligned with Dr. Lehman. He came to work as a consultant for me in the business I was in. And I had a very close working relationship with him up until the time of his passing in 1992. Al and myself, we would talk several times on the phone every week. And we would also see each other in person every month on consulting trips and visits and those kind of things. And I think it's important that this Lehman Conference carries his name because it truly is the most renowned international conference in the swine industry. And I think that the University of Minnesota can be very proud of that, and also the Lehman family. And for those who didn't ever have a chance to know Al, if you're not 50, you probably didn't ever have the chance to ever meet Al. But I just want people to really know that Al was a genuine person. He was a great mentor of mine. He was a great mentor of the industry. He was a great people person, a great family man, and he was truly an icon. And I just sometimes think that we need to make sure that some people's names who get on titles of conferences or on sides of buildings and everything else, that the younger generation really know that there truly was a true person behind that name. And Al was certainly a genuine individual, and I'm really proud to say that he was two things. He was my mentor and he was my friend. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Wade, and he can go through a little bit of the history of our company. So thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Monsi, and we'll let Dave tell you a little bit about the history of our company.
Thank you for those words. We're going to bring...
Am I on?
Yes, all yours.
Okay.
Take it away.
All right. Thank you very much, Myrl, for that introduction. Monsi, I appreciate you and the Lehman Committee putting us together for the Morrison Lecture. I happen to know and work with both Dr. Lehman and Dr. Morrison, and quite the visionaries in the industry and the motivators. They really motivated people to get the job done. One quick story about Dr. Lehman. He came over from Webster City, flew his Bonanza over there, his V-tail Bonanza, picked me up at the Spring Green Airport here, and we were flying down to Kentucky to see Myrl. And we get over Illinois, Indiana, and we're in a fog bank. You couldn't see the front of the airplane. And Dr. Lehman says, "Dave, why don't you take over the controls here? I got to figure out where the heck we're at." It's a little bit like what we go through in the hog industry now. We're always in a bit of a fog trying to figure out where we're at and how we're going to get there. And Dr. Lehman was truly one of those people that could do that. On with HANOR. About HANOR, we're an integrated food company. And as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, our core values, those 6 core values were put together back in 1999 when we were just getting things rolling. And we're also an exporter of premium pork products worldwide through the Triumph market. A little bit about our history. Started in 1978 with a 1,000 sow Sands unit in farrow to finish in Nash County, North Carolina. In 1983, they built a second 1,000 sow farrow to finish operation in Edgecombe County. In Illinois, this is where we started our value-added project. Marengo, Illinois was a production nucleus farm, daughter nucleus farm for PIC. It was actually stocked with mature animals, and the way they got replacements in is through MMEW. There was actually a trailer where they would bring the MMEW pigs in from the southern pyramid of PIC's operations and test the pigs in that trailer before they would introduce them into the herd. So they were there basically their entire life. Continued North Carolina expansions in 1988 to 1992. There was a 1,000 sow farm put on the farrow to feeder farm put on the Whitaker site in the Nash County, and then there's a 1,250 sow farrow to feeder pig site in Edgecombe County added to the 2 original sites in North Carolina. Then in 1994, HANOR started making a real push for more pig production. Cage, Creekside, Polly Ridge, and then the DN Sow Farm. The DN Sow Farm was set up to multiply gilts for the entire North Carolina system. Polly Ridge and Creekside actually were sending weaner pigs to Illinois, and I'll show that here in a second. And then Cage Farm was a commercial farm that was producing feeder pigs that were finished in the North Carolina area. In 1994, we also had expansion into the Oklahoma. We built a 2,500 sow farrow to finish two-site operation, and this was a boar multiplication operation for PIC. Again, the multiplication aspect to our business. In 1995, the Greene County, Illinois, called our Whitehall Finishers and Bluffdale Nurseries, were taking pigs from Polly Ridge and Creekside, and these were gilt multiplication operation that took these pigs and raised them up and sold them as selects to various producers within PIC. In 1996, the Spring Green operations, the genetic nucleus farm, the old PIC genetic nucleus farm called Main Farm, was acquired along with 3 550 sow breed or wean to finish, or sorry, farrow to finish farms that produce gilts for PIC, and now eventually have started producing gilts for HANOR. Continued expansion in 1996, the Ames, Oklahoma sites called Trails End. So there was 2 10,500 sow sites built in Ames, Oklahoma, with full finishing capacity out in western Oklahoma near Moreland. We had 8 10,000 head nursery sites and 8 or 16 10,000 head finishing sites that all multiplied gilts for PIC. In 1999, we actually took some of the finishing off the major county site and replaced it with sows, and we added 1,500 sows to that base in 1999. In 2002, we really started pushing more finishing in Iowa. We were getting out of our finishing in North Carolina in order to take advantage of some cost structures. We were moving some finishing out of Oklahoma also, and but really trying to get the East Coast pigs back to the Midwest for cheaper feed and get them closer to the markets for harvest. And so by 2006, we were up to 240,000 spaces in Iowa. From 2003 to 2012, in North Carolina, we added 1,700 sows into some finishing and nursery systems that we had abandoned to move wean pigs to Iowa for finishing. Also in Spring Green, we acquired 2 more 500 sow farms for multiplication purposes in the Spring Green area that brought the total area up here up to about 4,100 sows in Spring Green. In Major County in Oklahoma, we had 1,000 sows added to our Trails in 3 project, brought that up to a 5,000 sow farm. And then we converted a 2,500 or 10,000 head finishing site to 2,500 sows in Moreland, Oklahoma, in one of the 10,000 head sites. Marengo Sow Farm, as I had indicated earlier, that was a farrow to full finish farm. We converted the finishing into pen gestation and added 1,500 sows. So at the time, 2005, when we remodeled this farm, it was up to 2,500 sows. And then I have a little bit more of a story about Marengo here in a few minutes. In order to accomplish what we needed for the expansion for Seaboard Triumph Foods plants, we added 16,500 sows out of the finishing barns in Moreland, Oklahoma. So we converted 6 10,000 head finishing sites to 2,750 sow farms. We also added a 5,600 sow pen gestation barn near Bader, Illinois. and we added 6,000 sows in Canton, Missouri, which are multiplier sows. They supply gilts to our Trails End facilities in Oklahoma. Also, we sell gilts to a partner of ours in Ohio. And then we also take the residual gilts. We have some spare finishing for gilt development in Northern Illinois that we use for backup gilt supplies in case we have health breaks. So as far as the United States production history goes, as of 2020, we're just at 1 million spaces in Iowa. In Illinois, we have 7,300 sows with 120,000 nursery and finishing spaces. In Oklahoma, we have 25,000 sows near the Ames, Oklahoma area. Out by Moreland, we have 22,000. North Carolina, there's 21,300 sows yet. Missouri, 6,000, and Wisconsin, 4,100. So a grand total of 85,700 sows with just under 1.2 million nursery and finishing spaces. A little bit about Marengo. I'm going to go through a few slides here, just showing our farms and where they're at. Marengo's Northern Illinois. This was like I said, 1,000 sow daughter nucleus farm for PIC for many years. Now it's a 1,700 sow farm producing gap level wean pigs for finishing to go into a Whole Foods market. And I'll expound on that here in a little bit. This happens to be our DN sow complex in North Carolina. The 3 barns in the foreground were the original 2,500 sows. And then the 9 finishing barns over there toward the upper part of the picture were actually renovated into 2,400 sows of farrow to wean production. There's actually off to the left-hand side, the nursery system we had. We converted that to GDU, and they produce their own gilts internally at that site. Trails End 2, this is a 10,500 sow site. I think Tara's going to go into some of the uniquenesses of why we built these farms this way here in a little bit. But these are basically 4 2,500 sow farms knocked together with hallways, but we run them as 5,000s. Trails End 3, this was the original Major County site that was a boar multiplier for PIC. If you look over here on the right-hand side of this picture, this is a 1,250 sow farm, would be farrow to full finish. But we added 1,250 sows over here for 2,500 sows, and half the boars were finished in the site on the left-hand side of the screen there. And what you're looking at here is our boar stud, actually, also. This is our Whitehall finishing complex in Whitehall, Illinois. You can see 7 10,000 head finishing sites there. There's another finishing site off to the lower left of your screen. But that was all built in 1995 and 1996 and producing market hogs today. And I got a special project going on there I'll talk about here in a few minutes. This is Main Farm. This was a farm built in 1972 by PIC. It's a genetic nucleus farm in the U.S. HANOR bought this farm in 1996, and it's our R&D and genetic nucleus farm for the Triumph Foods genetics. This is Roberts Ranch. Roberts Ranch was originally built with, if you look up here in the kind of the left center, those were 8 10,000 head nursery sites on Roberts Ranch proper. And then they had 12 10,000 head finishing sites scattered amongst the property here. Like I said, it's over 5,000 acres. There's also 4 more finishing sites just about 5 miles southeast of this property that rounded out the system we used that were going to be used for growing gilts for PIC at one time. This is our Dutchman Creek facility near Bader, Illinois. Weaned its first pigs, I believe, in 2017. In Expedition Acres, weaned its first pigs in 2018. And this is multiplication for most of our facilities at Trails End. And like I said, sent to a partner. We also send gilts to a partner in Ohio. How are we adding value to our products? Well, we were one of the first ones to sign on to America's Best Pork program with Farmland Foods and sold under their Farmland label. And the USDA approved that program in 1999. And you can see part of the 15-point program and the SOPs that we had to have for genetics, nutrition, veterinary guidelines, on-farm food safety, et cetera, et cetera. All those SOPs had to be an auditable trail. We got audited on those issues to make sure that we qualified for America's Best Pork program. While we were under the America's Best Pork program, we actually developed the Triumph name and the Triumph genetics. That was all done with Farmland Foods and transferred over to Triumph Plant when Farmland went out of business, and we picked up with Triumph Foods. So at this main farm, we have a customized genetics of the TR4, and that's our signature sire in Triumph Foods. And we continue to supply genetics to over 30,000 external sows, and that's that partner I'm talking about in Ohio. So again, the value added was customized genetics and multiplication efforts. At the Genetic Nucleus Farm, we have fire feeders, testing evaluation of boars and gilts. FIRE stands for feed intake recording equipment. This is equipment that each of the animals, and it happens to be boars in this case, have RFID tags in an ear, and it records the amount of feed that the animal eats whenever it walks into the station to eat. So we have about 17 boars on every other week eating out of this FIRE system. That gives us a handle on what their feed conversion weight and average daily gains are. Genetics crossbred program. Anytime a boar is selected for the genetic nucleus, it first serves 30 animals in a commercial setting. So it'll send semen off to a commercial farm. They'll get 30 matings on that boar. The boar is then parked for 2 months and then starts his inseminations at the genetic nucleus farm. And what that does is it allows time for the offspring from the commercial farms to be tested for average daily gain and robustness at the farm, but then it has meat quality characteristics picked up at the Triumph plant through the AutoFarm system. All that data then is put into PigTrack, and we're able to index our animals at the farms based on their progenies genetic evaluations. Triumph Foods started in 2016. The facility sits on a 56-acre footprint. We employ about 2,900 people full time. And as you can see here, they process a pig at 2.5 seconds, or 21,500 pigs a day. One of the acquisitions Triumph Foods made along with Seaboard Foods was to buy into some further processing. And Daly's happened to be a great fit for our project here in Missouri. The Missouri operations, Daly's has operations in Utah and in Montana, but now this Daly's plant is right across the street from the Triumph Foods plant in St. Joe, Missouri. So they have Daly's has 3 production plants. They produce 160 million pounds of smoked bellies annually. Now I'm going to get into Pederson Natural Farms. This is the GAP Level 1 system we have. It's located in Hamilton, Texas. We bought the operations in 1996, wholly owned in 1996, and it produces bacon, sausage, and ham products, further processed products. Sales have been increasing 20% per year. And our customers are really Whole Foods is one of the huge customers we have of with this system. But we're adding value through antibiotic, through gap level 1, and I'll go through some of the gap level 1 here in a second, and because they're raised under specific production practices. So at this Marengo farm, we moved that to 2,500 sows in 2005, but in 2015, we converted it to a 1,700 sow pen gestation. There are no crates in this facility. There's 150 lockdown crates for mating purposes, but the sows can only be in the crates but for 4 hours at the most, and only for insemination purposes. Here's some of the gap level 1 criteria. Detailed documentation is required, no antibiotics, 34 square feet in gestation, a minimum of 28-day wean age. That doesn't mean an average, that means a minimum. So we cannot wean a pig that's less than 28 days of age. No mutilation. We have bedding. We've got certain hours, specific handling requirements regarding the hours the pigs can be on the truck, things like that. Vegetarian diets, minimum of 10 square feet in the finishing. And then death loss, you have to have written action plans. For example, if your death loss is over 2.5%, you need to have a written action plans for that nonconformance in order to rectify the situation. The picture you see here is old-fashioned pork, which we own in Thorpe, Wisconsin. This farm also produces gap level 1 pigs. Again, showed a few more criteria here. No animal byproducts are allowed in the feed, and maximum of 25% of the area available to the pigs as slatted, no more than 25%. Required to use bedding and forage material. We use hay as our forage material. Ground corn cobs, straw, and wood shavings we use as our beddings. Antibiotics, we can use antibiotics in the sows in gestation, but we cannot use antibiotics in lactation for fear that the piglets will eat the sow feed, and then they wouldn't be considered antibiotic free. Anytime we treat a piglet with an antibiotic, we do what we call blue tag it. We blue tag the animal, and then it's out of the program. We still raise them with their cohorts, but we can't harvest that animal for gap level 1 criteria. Just a quick look in the barn. This was a pen of 50 sows. Just to give you an idea, the picture on the upper right was when I turned my camera to the right, and the picture on the left, or on the bottom there on the right, is when I took the picture to the left. That's what 34 square feet gets you. Just look at the amount of room that those animals have for roaming around. We use a Gestall feed system for our sow feeding at these farms. This is the open farrowing crate. We can close the farrowing crates for processing piglets, but other than that, it has to stay open. Finishing barns with shavings as bedding, and you can see the forage material that's on the floor there on the lower right. So the processing and packing is really where we're at in as value added through Triumph Foods, Seaboard Triumph, and Pederson. And one thing Myrl liked to talk about is how we've put a moat around our business model through the economies of scale for integration. With all these, we feel like we've protected ourselves through brand names and our size in order to be sustainable in the future. Environmental stewardship, just want a quick call out to Trails End 2 because in 2012, they were the National Pork Industry's Environmental Steward Award winner. And second is our environmental management and sustainability. One thing that I want to really emphasize here is that many of our operations have center pivots for disposing of lagoon effluent. what I really appreciate about this business model that Myrl put together was how we spoon feed our nutrients to the crops. Typically in conventional farming, you're putting all the nutrients on either in the spring or in the fall, and it's one application. If you have a huge rain, you end up with a migration of the nutrients off the property. What this does is we can spoon feed anytime we feel that the vegetation needs nutrients. So instead of putting on 250 pounds of nitrogen in one setting, we can divide that up the entire crop life and really prevent some water quality issues and sustainable. Another quick thing here, we're in the middle of a waste to energy program right now where we're going to be taking all the waste from those Whitehall finishing sites, those 7 or 8 finishing sites, and digesting that manure. If you see the yellow box up there toward the top, we're going to have a 24-day digester. Then we're going to harvest the methane, send the effluent back to Lagoon A, then for aeration, more aeration in Lagoon B. We're actually going to scrub this gas, put it into a pipeline, directly into a pipeline, or we will be trucking the effluent or trucking the gas off site. As you can see with the DVO digester that's the picture of the digester. And then we're also going to have on-site power generator. And you can see on the upper left, the CNG tube trailers are actually going to be able to haul gas off the site and inject it into a pipeline that's about 7 miles west of our Whitehall finishing. And you can see the bioglass cleaning skids, where that's the scrubbers that are going to be cleaning up the gas, taking the moisture and other constituents out and leaving the methane or biogas behind. And the last slide I have here is the solar panels. We're going to be starting a project also in Whitehall, installing solar panels just to reduce our carbon footprint. With that, I'm it. So I'm going to turn it over to Tara.
Very good. As Tara gets ready. Very good. As Tara gets ready. Tara, good seeing you. Dave, a great overview on the company history and the things that you've been doing to add value to the company, from multiplication to the integration with processing, and more recently to the environmental stewardship. So we have with us Dr. Tara Donovan. Very good to see you, Tara. Hey. So take it away from here, Tara.
All right, great. Hi, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulty today, and thanks for bearing with us. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit more into how we run our business on the farm and some of our values and our people. So adding value to our products through a dedicated team of highly talented people. And you know, this to be in a production system like ours with a lot of different areas, as Dave pointed out, takes a talented group of people. And so we have, you know, a production team, nutrition team, veterinary service, an analytical group of folks to help us make business decisions, and a production solutions team doing research. And so it takes this whole team to run a business like ours. We do a lot of training, and it's way beyond the pork quality assurance. That was kind of the first training modules back in the 80s. Animal well-being, advanced skills for managers, biosecurity training. This is just an example of some of the training that AgCreate has helped us do for our system. We have a compliance team, and our compliance team helps us to make sure that we do what we say we do, and then to document it. So we do internal assessments by our audit team. We have SOPs, we call them HPPs, or HANOR production practices. animal well-being program, and a biosecurity program. So we're doing assessments and audits just to make sure that our processes are in place. This is an example of a scoring system for a biosecurity checklist that we have trying to do this this season. So it was a nice example for me to put up today. So adding value to our products through our core production practices. And wanted to take just a second to talk about segregated parity production. And this was a management technology that really was talked about when that Oklahoma system that Dave mentioned, the Trails End system, was being built. And this was a 10,000 sow farm with kind of 4 quadrants. And in that setup, we had the ability to bring gilt into kind of their own separate farm and run what we called segregated parity production. And later, after several years of production, unfortunately, we had experienced a PRRS outbreak, and we had a discussion with some of my mentors in the industry and some of our experts at the time working on PRRS and trying to produce negative pigs from positive sow farms. And so I remember a personal story I wanted to just share with the group, that we had a discussion, and Dr. Bob Morrison, who I know is a mentor to a lot of us, certainly was a mentor to me. And I had just recently had my first baby. And so I said, hey, I don't know if I can attend the meeting. And he said, just bring him along. So here we are talking about PRRS and doing a rollover, we were calling it, using the segregated parity production. And Bob is walking around holding my firstborn boy, Gus. And so that was 18 years ago, actually. So his influence on us, goes way back, certainly in my career. And so just want to thank Bob for that, and for all his mentorship. And so using the parity segregated production, we've come back actually and used it recently during a PRRS eradication project, where we were able to move those older sows that had been infected to different farms as parity 2s and 3s, and bring in the new gilts into really their own farm. And so that was the other section of Oklahoma that Dave mentioned. And so I think this is a technology that maybe is a little unique, and it has a place for us, and definitely we've used it. So some other core production practices for us on the sow farm is an increased wean age. Dr. Roger Main, Dr. Adam Mosier kind of got us started in the industry looking in depth at wean age. Dr. David Rosero joined our team, and he helped us understand the importance of wean age. When we have a health issue, we definitely can get better performance and get those pigs over it if they have a higher wean age. And so he presented a few years ago at the Layman his data from our system that helped us make those decisions. One of the other unique things for HANOR is the use of internal gilt multiplication in some of our commercial farms. And so for a while, this strategy helped us to keep our PRRS positive sow farms stable. Some challenges that we experienced with that is when you have an acute outbreak, those gilts can be borne by remic. And so you have to really stop placing those into your gilt development unit for a period of time. And with recent viruses that we've encountered, those herd closures and the length to achieve a stable status has been longer. And so we moved to trying to eradicate, where it makes sense, the PRRS virus into some of our commercial herds, and built those, the most recent multiplication farm that Dave talked about in Missouri. So on to grow finish. I think anybody that works in grow finish has had a discussion about the performance differences between commingling pigs at weaning versus single source pig flows. And of course, we've done both. We do recognize that we get better performance with single source pig flows. And so we tried to build our system to accommodate that. We built some staging nurseries on sow farms in order to fill trucks to bring pigs to the Midwest. Built some grow finish sites to accommodate that flow, so we aren't commingling nurseries into finishers. And so Jim Moody and his team in Iowa have done an excellent job of helping us grow that business and get our flows so they can get us the best performance. Also, we changed from wean to finish barns back to nurseries and finishers. And some of the reasons for doing that was we had fewer sites. And so we could focus our efforts, on biosecurity, do some more training. Those young pigs take some more care, a little bit different feeding strategy, clearly. And so that enabled us to put a little bit more labor to those young pigs, and we see a performance difference by doing that. Also, tracking PRRS and PED, we can keep those pigs negative for PRRS and PED in nurseries, and that's just due to being able to focus a bit more on some of the biosecurity practices and build those sites with some of the enhancements that we have on the Sow Farm, and try to continue that and keep the pigs healthy and negative for PRRS and PED. And, we have experienced less than 1% nursery mortality, and that's really fun. That makes pig production fun when you can see them perform at their potential. So the next section is our health program, and this, it's all about herd profiling and monitoring for us to try to prevent health and predict performance and make improvements by using our data. I want to thank, again, Dr. Bob Morrison, and you guys can see his influence on our industry here with the Swine Health Monitoring Project. Dr. Cesar Corzo and his team have taken that and continued it. We really appreciate all the work in that area. We utilize that information internally and as an industry. The bottom section here is a chart that looks at our grow finish PED, the percent of our sites that are infected with PED laterally. And so our team in Iowa, again, focusing on biosecurity and trying to prevent those lateral infections of PRRS and PED in swine dense areas. So we spend a lot of time on prevention and diagnostics to help us make those decisions. We already kind of talked a little bit about the eradication strategies, the move toward internal multiplication gilt strategies. Spent a lot of time recently, I think my whole career, but definitely focused recently on biosecurity enhancements, from composting to truck drying systems, filtering, Danish entries, bench entries in Sow Farms. All of these things we're trying to improve our health and have better performance. I want to thank Dr. Holtkamp and his team at Iowa State University. We have utilized this technology, outbreak investigation process that was developed through a training course through Swine Health Information Center, their Rapid Response Corps. And so if you haven't done that or looked into this to try to understand how the PRRS or PED infection got into your farm, I think is really important. That's how we learn and that's how we improve. So we've really utilized this tool the last couple years in our system to help us get better at biosecurity. So our nutrition program, a few key attributes that I think are important and make us, in some cases, unique. We have mobile feed ordering and automatic feed tracking and verification, immune packs and components for health challenging situations. So Dr. David Rosero runs our nutrition team and specializes in helping us understand the immune complex challenges with PRRS virus. So he's made us some diets that help get those sows recovered. We have a special summer feeding program to promote growth during heat stress and prevent summer infertility in sows. And then last but definitely not least, he, along with some researchers at North Carolina State, developed the caliper system, and this is to measure and evaluate the condition of the sows, and that's been a really nice objective input into our sow farms instead of a visual score. It's a measuring device that gives you the body condition score, more of an objective measure, and it's given us a pretty substantial cost savings in our sow farms. And so kudos to that group to give us an objective process that we can implement in our farms. So the goal for us to improve is to use our data and real-time data and statistics to help us make those decisions. And I already talked a little bit about the wean-age study. We try to collaborate with university partners. Again, mentioned all of these collaborations in my presentation, and we certainly appreciate the experts in the industry to help us with the analytical decisions. We also have in-house research facilities, and I'm not going to go into these in the sense of time and detail. I'm going to show you some pictures, but we have a sow unit and a wean to finish unit, and also a nursery where we're able to do production research and help us to take those solutions and ideas and make sure they're going to be fit for production. So some pictures of our Oklahoma sow research site. It has some automated feeding system for each individual sow and weighing systems. Then there's scales. Here's a litter scale, individual scale here, and then monitoring equipment. These are cameras, a hallway scale to weigh sows. So all of the things that you need to do field research are have been added to this farm. Then a brand new facility as the Wean to Finish Research Center in Webster City, Iowa. Just getting underway, doing some research now. I'm thankful that I don't have to run the water medication in this facility on a day-to-day basis. It looks pretty complicated, but that's what this is the ability for us to put different water medications into different lines. Here's feed tubes into separate pens. Again, a typical research production facility. I'll talk about this here, a camera in just a second. So the last piece is technology and innovation. And I have to hand it to Dr. Rosero. He's got us interested in looking into all of this area of technology using smart cameras, real-time, cloud-based integration analytics. And so I'm certainly not an expert at it. He is, but I wanted to highlight what he's been doing with our system. And so we've formed a collaboration with another group called Asymmetrics. These are sensors that are put in the barn. This one is in a water, connected to a water line. These are for temperature, and I believe can do humidity highs and lows. And so that's a way to get basically our environmental metrics captured on a hourly, I think, minute basis, as frequent as you want it to read. This is just an example of a printout of a water flow in a farrowing room and the cyclical curve of when they eat and drink over the day. So clearly active during the day, resting at night. We use the smart cameras. So this is another picture of one of those sensors that I mentioned. This is actually a camera. And it's hanging above the pen of pigs, and it's able to take measurements and pictures and basically estimate the weight of the pig. And so these graphs are actual weights, physical weights with a scale, comparing this system and trying to calibrate this smart camera for weight estimation in the finisher. So one of the technologies that he's working on for us. And this is just a schematic of that process that is certainly being built and still, ongoing as we try to get connected with all of the data into a database and storage. So I'm not going to go through this with you. Definitely not my area of expertise, but again, I think that's the next generation for a production system like us, is to utilize our data and in a real-time fashion. So this is my last slide. These are some production techniques and technologies that we have implemented and we're using every day in our system. In the AI technology area, we use the GenePro IntelliMate automated insemination system. And so kind of a unique technology that we've been able to implement. The pulse needle-free systems, again, Dave mentioned all of the coordination and plant aspects and importance of our product. And so definitely continue to utilize the Pulse company and systems like that for our business. And then caliper system, mentioned that again, and then weigh tubes for finish weight estimation. And so actually being able to go in the field and have an objective measurement of pig weight has been helpful as well. And that's all I have, Montse. I think we have maybe a few minutes to entertain some questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Tara. Thank you very much. Thank you to Dave and Myrl as well for this great overview of the company history and the things that you are trying and continuing to do very well. You know, when I think about HANOR, one of the things that that comes to mind, at least to my mind, is that it's a data-driven company, and not just recently, but from the beginning. And we saw that today with the presentations, and obviously the way how you are going about implementing technology and so on. But one of the things, there was a question in the chat about over the years, and we saw that as Dave was giving the history, you've converted a lot of the existing space, right? I mean, you continue to improve and you continue making changes. And the question was whether the retrofit strategy was successful, and would you do it again? Or what critical lessons have you learned with these innovations?
Okay. So I think that's actually maybe a question for Dave. If it's okay, I'm gonna ask him to answer it. And he just stepped in the room with me, so you can't see him, but he's here. So Dave, Montse asked about the retrofitting our facilities as opposed to starting new. And as we grew, we made a lot of modifications. And has that been successful? And if you can comment about that.
It's been very successful. We've just repurposed a fair amount of our facilities in Oklahoma, from finishing to Sow Farms. The retrofits went well. It was very cost effective. We did it for about a third to half the price of new. And yeah, I couldn't be happier with the outcome of it.
Very good. So another question I have, I mean, the farm that you show us, the one on the research farm, it certainly looks like the farm of the future to me, right? You are trying a lot of different things. Could you, from all the things that you're trying, could you tell us which technologies are you finding the most favorable to bring value to the business? Or can you give us some insight about that?
That question to me?
Yes.
I'll ask you. I know which one I have, Steve, but you know, it's I want to hear what Dave has to say.
The quick one for me is the sow caliper. The art of feeding was taken away and made a science of feeding. And that's what I probably appreciate the most. You know, we're full feeding sows in lactation now, so we're taking all the guesswork out of step feeding. We've taken the guesswork out of feeding the sows in gestation because we got to hit a certain body score. No, it's brought a discipline to the system, and quite frankly, it has saved us millions of dollars implementing that simple technology.
Is that the same that you were going to choose, Tara?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Very good.
Objective measurement has been really helpful, you know, to as a training tool and to get consistency. Yeah.
And over the years, when we look at technologies, obviously you've tried a lot of things. Is there any technology that you think you wish had not been implemented in your system?
Well, you're going to get me on my soapbox. We got to get a way to make sure feeds keeps flowing out of our bins. And I've been frustrated for, you know, it's the same technology we've been using for 50 years. I've been in this business for 40 years. We've had the same technology, and we can't get the feed out of the bins. And that feed interruptions and those is devastating in the finishing barn for the health of the animal, the aggressiveness of the animal, etc. If I could plead to the industry of finding a way to keep feed flowing in our bins, I'd jump on it yesterday.
Okay, I don't know whether we can bring back Myrl or not, but or maybe you, Dave and Tara. Oh, there he is. Very good. So, Myrl, yesterday we heard about the industry, and obviously with all what has happened with COVID and the disruptions and so on, and we heard about the need that the industry needs to contract to get smaller. Would you agree to that? And if so, how would you go about it?
Well, that's a very good question, because with the labor standpoint we have in all packing companies have right now, labor is a issue. It was an issue before COVID came, and now after COVID's been here, it's even a bigger issue. So to get the right balance in these slaughter plants, harvesting the pigs is one issue, but you got to be able to convert the product into the size and the scope that your further processors, food service, and all those people want. And so right now, until we can get a labor situation, I think we're going to be looking at a system that's going to be anywhere between 95 and 90% capacity of what we used to have. And the other thing is in our system, I know that we spend more time now talking about pig flows, balancing of pig flows, than we ever used to, because before, if you had excess pigs, you could go to, if you couldn't even take them into your own integrated system, you could certainly go to other systems and have a home for these extra pigs. I think that luxury's gone. I think everybody's going to have to stay self-contained in the environment that they sell their pig to. And so hitting those numbers is going to be a real issue for producers. And I do think the industry has to shrink some to meet those criteria. You know, we also have too much pork. You know, I mean, the world demand is what it is, but, you know, every year production gets better and better and better. And so we put a system in our company that every year we're going to have to shrink our sow numbers, because if not, our pig numbers will get out of bounds with what we have the capacity of slaughtering. You know, and so it's a real balance, and it's a new paradigm for the whole industry to have. Never in anybody's lifetime would you ever thought that balancing your pig flows would be so important and so vital, but it really is. And I don't think that we can have excess pigs ever again. We're going to have to really match very closely your pig flow with your shackle space that you have available to you on an individual company basis. And so we do have to get a lot more disciplined than we are right now. And so you are going to see the industry shrinking, and not necessarily farms as much going away. It's just sow population shrinking, and the same number of buildings and farms will probably be the same. But you will see the sow herd shrink, just because there's not going to be capacity to kill these offsprings of all these pigs.
Very good point. And one of the things yesterday as well that was mentioned is that the pork industry doesn't have a very good reputation right now when it comes down to the consumer, right? A lot of the things that are happening or has happened. So how do you see, and this will be the last question, as your next step as a company, how do you see taking on that challenge and adapting your business again? Are you planning to go into post-processing even more, or how do you see it as, you know, big picture, main overview on where you want to go with the company?
Well, not only for our company and the Triumph family of companies, which involves some other producers with us, but we all have to get so that we have a more sustainable production system that's totally auditable. And when they come into these audits, it's going to be food companies doing these audits. And that's one thing that we use our Pederson pork model for. We've learned a lot about what consumers and high-end retailers want. And they come in and they audit our system very rigorously. And so we're going to have to get the point that from sustainability, from production practices, animal well-being, sow housing, antibiotic use, a whole array of things, our industry is just going to have to really get a little more in tune with reality, because that pressure is coming, and it's going to keep coming at us at a faster pace. I mean, look what the poultry people do. All of their product now is all antibiotic never, and those kind of things. And so we do have some challenges in front of us. I think our industry is certainly up to those challenges, but I think that we have to face them and not fight them. We have to figure out how we're going to accomplish those things. And that's one thing that I do appreciate about our partners at Triumph Foods, Christensen Farms, New Fashion Pork, Eichelberger Farms. Those people, they also have the same concept about sustainability, animal well-being, and those kind of things. So I think our system is getting well in the channels of what it's going to take to, to satisfy the end users. But it's going to be different than what we've all been used to, no question.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I do believe you are always 5 years at least ahead of many. So thank you for sharing that with us. And as Bob would say, Bob Morrison would say, you are really doing work that matters for the swine industry. So thank you for leading us. I know Bob would be proud of all you do, and Al Lehman too. Those two guys challenging us every day on how you think. You certainly have incorporated that in the spirit of the company, and it shows. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. So with that, we are going to move to the next presenter, and we are going to shift gears a little bit here, but not too much, in the sense that we also want to learn from another industry leader, and in this case, from the poultry industry. And specifically, we want to learn more about how, in this case, the poultry industry has worked together with the government to fight diseases. Okay, so diseases, foreign animal diseases, even human diseases, we cannot stay away from that. And obviously for us, we always keep in mind African swine fever, which, by the way, we have a breakout after this session. So to do that, to speak about the topic on how we get ready to fight about diseases, we have with us Dr. Michelle Kromm, who led many of the efforts in the fight against high-path avian influenza in Minnesota back in 2015. And more recently, she has also been involved with COVID. Michelle is a board-certified poultry veterinarian and vice president of animal health and welfare at Jennie-O, and she's also a veterinarian for Hormel Foods. She completed her DVM at Iowa State and her master in public health at the University of Iowa. After graduation, she decided she wanted to go south, and she actually went to the University of Georgia and completed her master's in avian medicine. But I guess she missed the winter. She missed the cold weather. She was headed north. She came to Minnesota, where she joined Jennie-O in 2007 as a staff veterinarian. And in her current role, Michelle supports animal welfare, antibiotic stewardship, and pre-harvest food safety programs. So, and she, as I said, has hands-on experience on how to deal with emerging diseases and how to work with others in the industry as well as the government. So, Michelle, with that, taking away, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Monse. Thank you for that introduction. So I'm going to jump right in here. And like Monse said, hopefully sharing some insights on the role of industry and how to create some partnerships with regards to emergency disease response. So of course, like Monse mentioned, my background is a poultry veterinarian. So although I'm not going to spend too much time this morning talking about highly pathogenic influenza specifically, all my comments, of course, are going to be through that lens, not only because that's my personal experience, but for a response from a broader perspective for our country. It's also the largest foreign animal disease outbreak that we've had. So a lot of the lessons we've learned and a lot of the things that will hopefully make us better in future responses, if those were to occur, is because of what we experienced in 2015. So we will talk a little bit about high-path influenza and the response process to begin with. We'll then talk about actually managing that response, what it takes day in and day out to be effective and efficient in an emergency disease response. And then finally, closing comments will be around collaboration and the need for collaboration and some thoughts that I have on how to create those collaborative partnerships moving forward. So summary of 2015 and our experiences here in Minnesota. For those of you that maybe can't see the slide very well, this is a picture of the aftermath of the high path strain that devastated the upper Midwest in 2015. So within Minnesota, we had a total of 108 prems affected starting in March of 2015. You can see the epi curve here indicated by the red bars, each premise affected being a box in that red bar each week. And you can see the distribution. We had a wide variety of production facilities affected, but obviously you see the turkey industry was most impacted. And keep that in mind as we kind of talk about the response and key players at the table when talking about the response. So in order to give you guys a little bit of feel what it felt like to experience this epi curve, it's one thing to see it kind of two-dimension on a graph. It's another thing to be boots on the ground and experience what it was like. And this is my best effort to give you guys that experience. So keep in mind the date range here, April 20th through the 24th. And in that time period, 31 cases of high path influenza happened in our region. You'll see some squares and circles and other symbols pop up as cases also were occurring in South Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin during this time point. So you can see these first two cases, number 1 and 2, that's Candy, Ohio County. That's the heart of turkey country as it be here in Minnesota. It's the number 5 county for turkey production overall in the US. So you see those triangles just keep popping up in that pretty dense production area. And again, you see the symbols pop up in other areas in our region, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Iowa experiencing cases all at the same time. So it really gives you an effect, or hopefully gives you an idea of the impact of that really dramatic, intense period of 4 to 5 days and 31 cases, and thinking about the demand on resources that would require, or the demand that would ensue after that really rough week. So let's talk, before we talk about the actual response management, I just want to make sure we're all kind of level set on the actual response process. So we're going to walk through this a little bit, and I am going to share some insights or some lessons that I learned from an industry perspective along the way. So just in general, for any foreign disease response, this is just kind of an overview of the steps of the process. So starting with exposure and then ending with repopulation. We're going to look at each one of these steps a little bit more in detail. So again, poultry veterinarian to an audience of mostly swine veterinarians, of course. These are close to market age toms, and don't know, obviously we can't interact very easily, but in general, the snapshot here is pretty clinically normal. You've got some toms strutting around, pretty perky, but if you look pretty close in the forefront of the picture, those of you that are good observers could probably notice the set of animals here showing some depression. We call these little turkeys right here, not little, I guess they're 45 pounds, but no-neckers. So they're starting to get hunched and showing some signs of discomfort or depression. So let's flash forward in the same barn just 2 hours later. You can see the dramatic behavior change in this flock. And the rest of the story is that this is a barn of about 20,000 turkeys, separated by a fence down the middle. You don't see the fence because it's in the background back over here out of the sight of the picture. And on the other end of this barn, we were depopulating for high path influenza. This is a picture of the first flock in the Jennie-O system, one of our contract growers that was impacted. And just to kind of share how quickly the behavior changed from relatively clinically normal to obviously some pretty dramatic depression. So we've got our exposure, got our diagnosis in this case, since we are already moving on to depopulation. I think one of the call outs here for diagnosis, and specific to influenza, but really a call out to viral entities or etiologies in general, they're never going to act like we think they're going to act. I unfortunately have quite a bit of experience in managing low pathogenic avian influenza outbreaks, and I can tell you that really didn't help to predict the characteristics or the behavior of the H5N2 high path strain in 2015. So you really need to be nimble and create opportunities to learn on the fly, because it's going to be really important moving forward to get more efficient and effective in your response, to also be learning along the way. Like with any FAD, only dedicated labs can run the tests for high path influenza, similar to African swine fever or FMD. And not only that, it also is only certain technicians. So they have to be qualified to run that specific test or those specific tests. And that all aligns to really some concerns around lab capacity. And I know for ASF, that's a specific concern for the industry. A couple of things to keep in mind. Many labs at the university settings are unionized, so that creates some constraints as well. So really you have to be very thoughtful around the testing schedule, make sure that it's communicated well and that it aligns with the after actions on those results. So if you're going to have positives, you need to have those positives shared or announced to the responders in a way in which it can maximize disease response. So as in knowing where the positives are and quickly being able to get resources in place to move to the next steps is critical in the timing of getting those test results published. So after we have our positives with high path influenza or with low path influenza, we do get some indemnity from the government. So the next step is for the appraiser to come out, basically verify that there are birds on the farm and get the head count. During 2015, it was also a requirement that the producer and the government agree upon the cost or the value of those birds before depopulation can occur. And the consideration here is you really need to know the details of the process of indemnity. Now, after 2015, we did remove the requirement to agree on the value, allowing that to happen after depopulation occurred, because we were running into roadblocks and disagreements and slowing down the depopulation effort, which obviously is a critical tool in the toolbox in controlling a foreign animal disease outbreak. So again, in 2015, we needed to agree on the value before depopulation, and we just need to understand for other disease responses if that same requirement is in place. So next step, obviously, is depopulation. This graph is to give you an idea on the time from sample collection to the actual time of depopulation. So you have the 109 sites for Minnesota along the x-axis and days from sample collection to depopulation completion on the y-axis. And you'll see that during some of the peak activity that we've got primarily turkey farms in this area in which turkeys were sitting there for 10 days, potentially shedding virus into the environment. So when we went through that graphic on the onset that showed the cases popping up, you can appreciate how difficult of an environment it is to operate or was to operate with all those cases. Some of these taller peaks where we're over 15 days, those would be the larger table leg operations in which you have something like 1 million birds on a given site. So those would be the delays in depopulation in some of those higher spikes. So just call outs, probably not a surprise for most of the folks in the audience that we followed the preferred methods or approved methods by AVMA, which did not include ventilation shutdown plus at the time. That actually came up for consideration and now is part of the AVMA's depopulation guidelines under limited circumstances. Because of our next point here, it really became quite difficult to get to these farms, both from a human capital as well as an equipment response perspective. And that 24-hour pledge is an aftermath or an after action item that came from interactions with industry and the government, in which we both agreed that quick depopulation for influenza now, probably not the same or potentially not the same for African swine fever, was a critical miss for us. And so we made this pledge that from diagnosis to depopulation, we really wanted to compress that time period to 24 hours. And that was actually the trigger for the poultry industry to look at alternative depopulation methods such as ventilation shutdown plus. I think a big call out here is not only from the methods that I just mentioned, but also this is the most resource and labor intense part of the entire FAD process or response process. You can think of the number of people potentially that could show up to a large site to help depopulate the site, as well as their comings and goings, both from a biosecurity standpoint, but then also from a humane handling standpoint. Contractors that are coming in to offer support or help in these processes are not going to be people that interact with animals on a routine basis. So it's really critical for producers and veterinarians to really empower your site managers to be an active participant in the depopulation process, even if that just means being present to watch over people as they're coming and going and making sure that the animals to the last moment are being cared for in a respectful way. Depopulation, then we've kind of gone over the peak to start our cleaning, composting, and disinfection process. So composting really from an influenza standpoint, because of the housing that we have in the poultry industry, for the most part was done in the house. And that was the thought there was to really keep all those potentially contaminated surfaces, bedding, and obviously the birds inside, to reduce the risk of virus contaminating the environment. After composting was complete and you're done with your C&D, regulatory officials, of course, are going to come out and verify that all those processes have been done, and that's through environmental swabbing. And really, I think overall, the key takeaway here is that we're in the interest, the whole point of this process or these processes is to inactivate virus. So from a compost standpoint, we're not interested in making organic compost for the tomato farmer down the road. What we're interested is in activating virus, and the outcome of that compost might not be pretty, but that's not what we're interested in. We're really interested in disease containment. The other call out as well is that for that verification step, it's going to be a PCR-based step. So swab of the environment is going to get tested first via PCR. And it wouldn't be rare to find genetic material still in those samples. So as you're putting your plants together, make sure you allow for time for virus isolation, because that's probably going to be necessary in some cases when there's detection of genetic material. We need to make sure whether or not that's associated with active virus or not. So on the home stretch repopulation, so the fallow period for high path influenza was 21 days. So after 21 days post C&D, we were able to repopulate the farm. Birds are then monitored on a weekly basis for 21 days. So at 3 different samplings to make sure there's no reoccurrence of disease, which did not happen in 2015 on any of our premises in Minnesota. But the call out here is that as we learn things and as the outbreak itself is going to be a very dynamic situation, policy is going to change. And I know in 2015, repopulation policy changed a lot in the course of the outbreak. Anywhere from, yes, go ahead and bring birds onto that farm, to no, we don't want restocking in this given area. And that change happening in the course of less than 24 hours. So again, keep in mind that that necessitates this really close communication between industry and emergency disease responders. So industry is in the know on what the expectations are, because the expectations will be constantly changing because of the dynamics of the outbreak itself. So now that we've got a little bit of baseline for what is required of the response, let's dig into how we actually manage a response and the different parties that are required to do an effective job. So these are just some considerations for those of you that haven't been in the situation. These are kind of generic questions that would really apply to any emergency situation. Here, of course, we're talking animal diseases, but some of the questions and some of the dialogue for this past week has been around COVID as well. Some of these questions could apply to really any emergency situation. So in this case, for 2015, why did the collaboration happen? And really, it came organically out of trust already existing between stakeholders. And I'll talk a little bit about this later on in the presentation and why that existed. It also comes because Incident Command, or the IC, needed help answering questions. Keep in mind that you're pulling resources from out of your state, out of your industry. They're not going to have the knowledge to really give direction, or give good direction at least. So they needed help answering some key questions in order to set the right directions or right path. And really, for us in Minnesota, it came down to our state regulars reaching out to existing industry contacts. And existing industry contacts, because of our interactions based on both low pathogenic avian influenza responses in the past, as well as our interactions with the National Poultry Improvement Plan, or NPIP, that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So this is the overall incident command structure at the peak of the response in Minnesota. And I don't know if you can kind of see in the bottom right-hand corner, this org chart represented 520 people at the peak of the response. Keep in mind that Minnesota, although we do have a really highly functioning Department of Agriculture and Board of Animal Health, they're relatively small agencies. So of that 520, maybe something like 50 to 70 people were actual local Minnesota-based folks. And so what we're going to spend the next few slides talking about is this industry advisory group, which had direct access to the top of this org chart, which was absolutely critical in an efficient and effective response in 2015. And why did that collaboration happen? And I mentioned this already, but we each come to the table with our own perspectives. I mean, the regulatory agencies are really in control of the disease response. But industry really has the details and the knowledge on how eradication will be most efficient, because they're closest to these organizations or the farms to know how to be impactful with the resources that are presented to us. So together, that collaboration really gets us to our endpoint, or our destination of controlling the outbreak most efficiently. And the important piece here, of course, from an industry perspective, that also reduces the economic impact of the industry as well. So to put it another way, we each have expertise, and here's just a list of kind of some broad categories of expertise that are necessary for a good, efficient response. And so if you kind of put a box around who has this expertise or knowledge, you have industry at the table, you have regulatory officials at the table. And then for influenza, as well as potentially some of our FADs in the swine industry, you might need a wildlife agency to help understand or respond appropriately. And the point here is that we each do have our own lanes that we primarily operate in. But when it comes to disease response, we need to understand and work together to merge those lanes every once in a while in the effort to get more effective and efficient at the response. So hopefully you understand why there was a need. Now let's get into the details on how information was actually exchanged. So initially, 1 or 2 farms way back in mid-March in 2015, it was really on an ad hoc basis. It was a small enough outbreak. People knew each other well enough that it was either picking up the phone to ask specific questions, or maybe 1 or 2 in-person meetings to try to set the plans for the next couple days. But as you can appreciate, with 500 some odd people on the ground, ad hoc discussions didn't work very well for very long. So we pivoted and set up a formal time, 3 times weekly, Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, right at the Emergency Operations Center, in which it was time for industry to sit with the state and federal responders and really talk about what was going well, what wasn't going so well, and setting priorities for the next couple days. And this also became really important as the outbreak became relatively prolonged. Those incident management teams, or USDA teams, do rotate. It's either a 2 to 3 week rotation, and you get a whole new management team coming into your area. So having those discussions on a very regular basis really helped with consistency over that prolonged disease process, a prolonged outbreak response, sorry. So I talked about going from ad hoc to a larger formal process. This is actually a sign indicating where the first emergency operations center was. And if you look on the left-hand side, you can probably guess that it was actually in the basement of a county jail, one county over from where I'm actually talking to you from at the moment. So I was lucky enough not to take a left, going to the right and going into the basement of the jail to start with. This is what you would find. A group of about, I think, 6 to 10 of our state regulators, combination of the Department of Ag and the Board of Animal Health here in Minnesota, sitting around some tables trying to figure out what we're going to do next. Flash forward to about probably 6 weeks later. This is the same type of meeting, debrief of the operations group. Right here in the middle is Dr. Byron Schick. He's a USDA veterinarian. I think he calls Oklahoma home normally. This is his operations chief, right to his right. To his left is Dr. Dale Lauer, who's our avian disease program manager for the state of Minnesota. And Mike Starkey, who was our state incident commander, employed with the Department of Ag here in Minnesota. So again, it gives you an idea of how a more formal process was necessary when you're trying to give direction to this room full of people. So who was actually at the table for these discussions? And again, I mentioned this already. It was industry, state, and then Unified Incident Command, which would include the state and federal incident commanders, as well as the operations chief. So from an industry standpoint, just to give you guys a lay of the land with the industry in Minnesota, we have nearly 1,000 poultry farms in Minnesota, which include turkeys, egg production, and broilers. And from an industry standpoint specific to this response, as you saw in the numbers at the beginning of the presentation, it was the turkey industry that was most impacted. So the veterinarians that were sitting around this table were turkey veterinarians, myself included in that group, as well as our state commodity representative. So the Minnesota Turkey Growers Association executive director also happens to be the executive director for the Chicken and Egg Council in Minnesota. So we were able to be very efficient with that participation at the table. And some considerations, just as you're thinking about what this might look like for your own states or your own geographic area, whether that be a province or a set of counties, is really, of course, you need to keep it small and promote action. People at the table need to be decision makers or have direct lines of communication to the decision makers. And face-to-face meetings are really important. It would be interesting if something were to happen, knocking on wood, in the face of COVID, all the extra challenges that might create for us in this kind of emergency response atmosphere. But remember, this is, an emergency, and decisions have to be made in a matter of hours, maybe a day. And so it's really important to have people that are going to follow up and be action oriented at the table. So diving a little bit more into detail around the different roles. For the veterinarians at the table, they kind of wore two different hats. They served as liaisons, as I mentioned. They brought information back and forth between the companies that they represented, as well back and forth between those companies and the emergency commanders, whether they be state or federal. And they provided some feedback on logistics, what's going well, what's not going well. But they also coordinated activities outside of that formal response. And the best example of this from the turkey standpoint in 2015 is that we did some early marketing exercises and basically created a firewall to contain the virus from spreading farther north and east into some other more intensive areas of production. And those activities were all coordinated outside of this formal incident response. Obviously, they also served as subject matter experts, or SMEs, because of their knowledge of both not only disease management, but of course of the production systems that they're representing. From a commodity representative standpoint, the core responsibility here was communication, communication, communication. And there's basically 4 different buckets of folks that the commodity rep was responsible to liaison with. The primary one, of course, being producers. So of those, let's just say, I think it's like 80 turkey farms, not everybody was represented at the table. So it was really important for the commodity rep or executive director to also be at the table to make sure, as a check and balance, that everybody's concerns and perspectives were being presented. It was also important for the executive director to be up to date on progress, to be able to communicate back to the broader industry and make them feel comfortable on the progress that was being made. They also served, in our case in Minnesota, as the primary media contact. And I'll talk a little bit more about external communications here in a couple slides, but from an industry perspective, we really deferred to the commodity representative and its office to answer questions on behalf of the industry. And of course, like they do from day-to-day operations, the commodity rep was really critical in getting audiences with local legislators as well as state and federal policymakers to make sure resources were available when and where we needed them. This is just a picture. At the time in 2015, Senator Al Franken was one of our senators from Minnesota. So you can see him in several of these pictures visiting our emergency operations center. And this bottom right is Governor Mark Dayton, who was our, obviously the governor of Minnesota at the time, talking with our state incident commander, Mike Starkey. State program director. So again, because this was a poultry disease, we're fortunate enough to have a state program director. We now have an equivalent in the state of Minnesota as well on a swine program director, which is a more recently established position within the Board of Animal Health. But the role of the program director was really to advocate for disease elimination and control strategies, trying to do the work of the regulatory officials, but with really the interests of the industry in mind. So our director represented the industry when industry wasn't present at the table. Obviously, as a production veterinarian, although I had several farms or multiple farms impacted by influenza, there was also lots and lots of farms that weren't. So we also needed to make sure that resources were made available for business continuity to continue outside the outbreak. So industry wasn't able to be present at all times at the table. And really it was our state program director that empowered or created the space for industry to be at the table with equal status. So other response communication type considerations. There's going to be a lot of stakeholders that are not directly impacted that could eat up resources. Those folks that want to know what's going on, but are not going to be directly impacted by the decisions being made by incident command. And so we really need to be thoughtful about the resources utilized or allocated to keep these folks informed, but making sure that energy and important human capital is not being taken away from the incident response itself. And so there's just a few thoughts here on how to handle that, really looking outside of that incident command for other resources that could be used, such as the university, both through extension or professors. And then the other piece is other commodity leaders, such as obviously within influenza, avian influenza outbreak, we could use the national or the Minnesota Pork Board to help communicate messages as well. And here's just some points on what to communicate and potentially how to communicate it. I know for Minnesota, the Board of Animal Health's website was really critical, and they did an amazing job of keeping a lot of the information here up to date. So it was a really easy resource to point people to that just wanted to know what was going on, even though they didn't have any direct impact or weren't being directly affected by the outbreak. So we just spent, the last maybe 10 minutes or so talking about these folks, all the folks that you would find represented in this org chart at some point. But as we think about what we do every day from an industry perspective, there's a lot of other folks that we haven't talked about that would still need some level of communication and consideration, especially over the length of a longer a longer and more sustained outbreak, such as unaffected farms and then these other external key stakeholders. So let's just talk a few minutes about managing these relationships in the face of an FAD response. So internally, for production systems, Jennie-O being a vertically integrated company, these are some of the questions that we didn't really think about on the onset of the outbreak, really not knowing how prolonged and how impactful it was going to be. So you're going to have almost a binomial distribution of personnel. You're going to have farm folks that are intimately involved with response measures, and you're going to have other supporting folks that are going to end up being underutilized, potentially, depending on the size of the outbreak, because of the loss of animal life, and they're going to not have too many things to do. So you see that list here: feed mill personnel, live health personnel, plant personnel, potentially all being buckets of talent and human capital that could be utilized in a different way, a non-traditional way, in helping you in your response process, because they're going to be looking for things to do. The other important piece is you really need to have point people that are going to help you manage the paperwork. They need to be the same people throughout the length of the outbreak. I mentioned briefly that policy changed over the course of an outbreak, as you would expect and hope that it would, but that also obviously creates frustrations. As policy changes, paperwork potentially changes as well. So having a handful of people that are very detail-oriented and good communicators is really critical for managing that paperwork piece when it comes to a prolonged outbreak. And then get more from a production system standpoint and a farm standpoint, being very thoughtful about who's going to be allocated to be clean staff and who's going to be allocated to be dirty staff, and how you're going to manage those two groups of people day in and day out, especially in the potential face of an expanding outbreak. The graph here to the right is feed volume within Jennie-O. Yellow line was 2013, blue line 2014, and this orange line and this kind of falling off the cliff orange line was 2015. So you can see the impact of just our milling capacity and milling needs in the face of influenza. So external communications, this probably could be a whole nother talk in itself. So I'm not going to do it justice here. But I think these three kind of take-home messages, if you do these well, it will pay dividends. So unified talking points that are clear and concise are absolutely critical. Similar to the ASF talking points that we have, the high path influenza talking points led with, this is not a food safety issue. Really trying to make general public and consumers as comfortable as we can that they don't have to worry about their food supply. And the other piece is that all the important stakeholders in the response need to have the same core messaging. And what this allows or prevents as best we can from happening is that a consistent message makes drama for the media less difficult to create. And it's one of the things that I'm probably most proud of in 2015 is that in spite of all that was going on, we really didn't have to worry too much about media noise because we did execute on this external communications piece quite well. And that's really because of the amount of collaboration. Really, no matter who a journalist called, they would get the same talking point, whether it was the Minnesota Department of Health, the Board of Animal Health, whether it was companies that were impacted or companies that weren't impacted. We all basically talked from the same script. And that really helped to quell kind of the media flurry that you could imagine could have happened in the face of such a large foreign animal disease outbreak. Okay, so we've hinted at, or I've hinted at, or have flat out pointed out the need for collaboration in an emergency response. But if you don't have that currently within your industries in your area and or with the regulators in the area, how do you create that collaboration? And so that's what we're going to spend our last bit of time here together talking about. Starting with the National Poultry Improvement Plan. And I'm going to start with this because I think it's a pretty important advantage that the poultry system or the poultry industry in the US has over a lot of other industries. And we're going to spend just a couple of slides talking about why. So at its heart, the National Poultry Improvement Plan, or NPIP, is a cooperative program. It basically forces industry, state, and federal regulators together in order to figure out how the new diagnostic technology can be effectively applied to improve the health of poultry flocks in the U.S. It applies standards for the monitoring of poultry flocks for the presence of specific diseases, and in most cases, with the exception of influenza, these are vertically transmitted diseases. So in the poultry industry, we think salmonella and mycoplasmas would be the core of the monitoring programs that we have. And it's also very broad-based. So it not only includes commercial poultry, so turkeys, layer chickens, as well as meat chickens, but it also has provisions for waterfowl, exhibition, poultry, backyard poultry, and game birds. So it's very all-encompassing in its scope. And it's impactful because, one, it's voluntary. So it's collaborative, it's voluntary, but even though it's voluntary, it's very widespread in its use and participation in commercial production. And really, it's because of that joint approach or collaborative approach between industry, state, and federal stakeholders. That's kind of the impetus for why participation is so widespread in commercial production. There are limitations, though, for NPIP. It does not actually certify health status for a given flock. What it does is it's a monitoring program that applies to the poultry populations in a given area. And it is not designed to determine the operational status of a flock during the outbreak. So NPIP testing regimes and monitoring programs are not designed to help you manage a disease outbreak. And then although NPIP itself, because of those two previous comments, didn't directly reduce the impact of influenza, the existence of NPIP laid the foundation for a collaborative approach. So indirectly, I believe it did have a major impact on our ability to have an efficient response. So now we're going to pivot a little bit, and this is my editorialized poultry veterinarian version of the differences between high-path influenza and African swine fever as of May of last year. And this is really where I became involved in emergency disease planning for Hormel and for the state of Minnesota. And so it's just comparing and contrasting several different aspects of disease response planning and monitoring programs, both at a federal level, and then we'll see on the next slide at a state level. And what I want to point out here, because of the topic of my talk, is that, again, from an influenza standpoint, we're very fortunate that both on a federal and on a state level, we've had this culture of collaboration and trust across all stakeholders. Now, I'm not saying that in pockets of the pork industry, we don't also have a culture of collaboration and trust, but we're working on putting a different spin on it, really trying to figure out as industry, state, and federal stakeholders how we're going to align our resources and knowledge base to make sure that if and when, again, knock on wood, something were to happen as an FAD for the swine industry, that we have the same opportunities to collaborate on a response in order to put our best foot forward collectively as a country. And that's called out for in the red books of both ASF and high-path. And for those of you that aren't familiar, the red book is basically the emergency response manual put together by USDA to kind of guide or communicate what their current thoughts are on how they would approach a disease emergency. And from both of those books, you see that USDA itself is calling out the need for collaboration and cooperation from all stakeholders. So again, there's lots of indications for us as industry that we need to be involved and active participants in disease emergency management and response. So next couple slides are just some thoughts on how to create those collaboration opportunities. And one is to identify goals that that you can work on collectively. Obviously, this is maybe somewhat easy to do internally, but maybe a little bit more difficult to grasp or have some ideas on how to do it with external stakeholders. External as in not within your own production company or your own veterinary clinic potentially. And so from a poultry side of things, we've taken some opportunities to look at both regulatory and non-regulatory disease control in order to build these partnerships with mostly our state regulators, but some federal regulators as well. And I call out the examples of low-path influenza and avian metapneumovirus. Low-path being a regulatory disease and metapneumovirus being a non-regulatory disease as examples in which we've collaborated. And again, being relatively new to the pork industry, maybe some examples such as PRRS, or I know there was a lot of collaboration that happened for PEDV, and that would have been or probably was an opportunity to build some trust and collaborative relationships. One of the things that we've really been focused on Minnesota in the last 12 to 18 months is the second bullet point, which is the development of response plans. And the development of planning does a couple things. One, it obviously gets you some work product that hopefully you will never need. But if you do, hopefully it's something that is operational as you take it immediately off the shelf. But then it also provides an opportunity to bring in all the stakeholders to have a voice at the table before anything happens, which is really critical in having that baseline level of trust before you're faced with an emergency. And I hope by now I've said it enough that an effective and efficient response does require industry input. But you have to be very careful and thoughtful about who represents the industry at that table. You really need individuals that are going to have a global perspective to the disease response. They're not going to just be at the table representing the individual interests of their company or their production system. They really need to have the perspective of what are we going to do to benefit the overall industry in our area. And you also need to proactively identify those persons as best as possible and have conversations to make sure that they're interested in being part of that stakeholder group or having a seat at that table during an incident command, knowing that it could be a very prolonged process and a very time and labor intense process as well. And then as we talk through the need to have a sustained response, again, if you had asked me back in March of 2015, how much effort it was going to take to control high-path influenza, I thought, as well as my regulatory colleagues in the state thought, hey, we'll have this under control in the next 4 to 6 weeks, given, again, all the things that have to happen during the response. Clearly, that wasn't the case. So you also need to make sure that you have a large enough set of relationships to constantly be potentially bringing in new people if it becomes a prolonged response. And don't forget about those key supporting industries. And that's another thing that within Minnesota, we've really been focusing on. So when I talk about supporting industries, I'm talking about folks like the feed milling industry, rendering, transportation, those folks that we are intimately dependent on, but probably aren't going to get a seat at the table. So who are those voices that you need to have a direct line of communication with? And get them engaged in the process. So again, you're getting their feedback. So your response plan hopefully is immediately operational. But if you run into roadblocks, you have this core set of people that you can go back as subject matter experts to ask very thoughtful and specific questions. And the other piece is just making sure that you're going to have people that are going to make it difficult. And that's okay. But we need to have a game plan to make sure that they're not sucking resources and energy away from the broader emergency response. And again, think about folks like Extension and university personnel who are going to be waiting in the wings to support you and giving them something to do and helping with these folks that are going to be a little bit maybe reluctant to be engaged from a regulatory perspective. That might be an excellent spot in which somebody from Extension could go out and have some conversations to explain why it's important for them to participate or potentially just update them on what's going on in the environment around them. So the incident command structure is not really designed to catch all the data you want to throw into it. It's not a well-tuned machine. What it is a cookie cutter approach to manage all sorts of different emergencies: wildfires, earthquakes, hurricane response. But when we pivot to the need to use this structure for animal disease response, the details really do matter and are critical for an efficient and effective disease response. So it really relies on the industry, federal regulators, state regulators, and the responders to figure out how they're going to communicate most effectively and get the details figured out and ironed out. Because the outlet, the incident command structure, is pretty set. So it really depends on the collaboration of industry and those stakeholders, other stakeholders, to figure out which adapter is going to work best to really maximize the efficacy of the incident command structure. Again, the structure is necessary. You can't manage 500 plus people on a whim, but you need to be very thoughtful in making sure that they have the right disease information to make that most effective. So some key take-home messages. Emergency response is going to be a dynamic situation. We would expect nothing less. Most of these diseases we're not going to have any experience with, hence the name foreign animal diseases. And as we learn more in the course of the response, it will be necessary to make pivots. And that means that industry and responders need to be lockstep in the information that they have and the direction that they're going to go. And a collaboration during an emergency is not going to happen organically. It's an emergency. You really have to create the time and space to have these important conversations. And that's dependent on both the regulators or the responders, as well as the industry demanding a voice at the table, again, to make sure that we're doing all we can with the resources that we have. External communications need to be simple and aligned, and they need to be widespread amongst all the stakeholders to make sure that the communications and talking points are very consistent. And trust and transparency between all stakeholders needs to happen prior to an event. Again, an emergency is not the time to meet your neighbor. The time to meet your neighbor is in peacetime, where you can hang out in the backyard and have a beer together, right? I mentioned that for the poultry industry, we're very lucky to have NPIP as a backbone for this, but hopefully I've left you with some thoughts that if you don't have the level of collaboration yet within your areas of operation, hopefully there's some tidbits there that will help you create those opportunities. I just like to acknowledge this team for all their hard work, not only in 2015, but their ongoing support as we continue to learn more about disease management, and hopefully not only make it better for the poultry industry, but hopefully for the swine industry as well, if the need were ever to arise. And with that, take questions with the time that we have, Monty.
Very good, Michelle. Very good. Very thoughtful presentation. Very inclusive. So a lot to digest there. I have a few questions, and I know there are more questions in the chat that I don't think we will have time to answer them all. So if you wouldn't mind after this, if you could just take a look and answer some of those in the chat, I would appreciate it. But let me ask you one. You talk about the need to build trust and engage others, and you also mentioned about policies changing on the fly. The question on that is, were you able to influence those policies because of that relationship you had, or were those policies that, as you said, may change in 24 hours, were they top down, or they were actually you driving some of those policies?
A
bit of everything.
Yeah, we actually, because of the nature and the collaboration happening at a local level, and just having some outstanding leadership in our incident commanders from USDA, we were actually able to have a very direct impact on policy. More so than I would have ever thought that we had, with a direct line to the folks out in Riverdale, and talking through the good and the bad on why policy may or may not work, or why we may or may not be able to implement it. So yes, we definitely had a direct impact on some of the policies, and some of the policies that still exist today in the aftermath of 2015.
Yeah, and you mentioned again that a lot had to do with build trust and relationships, and a question that was in the chat as well. How do you build those relationships and the trust without being accused of collusion?
So, yeah, you have to be very thoughtful in conversations. So one of the best ways for me to answer that is that when you look around and you're thinking about who the key stakeholders or who you want to have at that table, being the veterinarian is a little bit of a safeguard against that. Obviously, I know details about our business, but my role as the veterinarian is protect animal welfare and animal health. And that is also why it's really important to identify those key stakeholders ahead of time, because you want to vet that out a little bit, right? You want to really try to have some critical conversations ahead of time to really understand what's motivating people to volunteer their time and participation. But yes, you have to be definitely very careful, especially knowing what markets can do in a disease outbreak around being careful not to talk business, but to focus on the task at hand, which is minimizing the impact of the outbreak on the industry that you're representing.
Yeah, that's a very good tip. So going back, you had to change a lot of things as an industry, and very quickly when you went through that. Has the poultry industry, do you think, has learned the lessons, and is the industry better prepared because of what happened?
Most definitely. There's a couple things I will share about that. So on an industry collaboration, what we do every fall and spring during migration season is active surveillance now. So we're going out to all of our flocks that we deem high risk on the ground, and we're sampling them every week for influenza. As you saw, how quickly things spread because of the intensity of production, where I call home, finding influenza sooner rather than later is really critical for disease containment. And then from an overall industry perspective, the broader national industry, one of the things that did come out through NPIP now is required biosecurity guidances. So we are now audited on an annual basis to make sure that we have implemented biosecurity policies that the entire industry agreed on through the NPIP process. And the carrot to that is that if you're not certified and you haven't been doing what you're supposed to be doing, your indemnity money is at risk. So if you're certified from a biosecurity program perspective, you might not be reimbursed for the value of those birds if something were to happen.
Okay, very good. And then just one last question before we move to the next part of the program. And if you could just address that very quickly. I mean, you mentioned the population, which is one of the hardest parts of the process when you have to, respond to a foreign animal disease. And Dave Preisler alluded to that yesterday as well, that maybe we don't do enough when we do some of these exercises to prepare for that. So how do you train your people for that in times when there is no disease? Can you prepare really for that?
So there's a couple things. At Jennie-O, we actually own now some of our own depopulation equipment. So we do annual exercises, one, to make sure it's still functional, and two, just like with probably most of the producers or veterinarians on the phone, to make sure that if we have turnover, we still have people that are trained to utilize that equipment. From a state standpoint, we also have a state stockpile, and we are pretty proactive in trying to, again, dust off that equipment, bring new individuals together, and in the process, executing what would be the process if something were to happen.
Okay, very good, Michelle. I will let you go. I know you have a lot of things to do, and we are at the end of the time. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. So stick around. There are a few questions, if you don't mind addressing in the chat. I would appreciate as we move to the next part of the program. And for the rest, thank you. And for the rest of the audience, if you could hang on 2 more minutes. I have 2 things that I still want to get across. First, remember that we still have breakouts coming on, the ASF breakout, the labor breakout, and then the technology one. Stick around for those. They will start at 11. After that, we have added one session about the last conversation, the last halfway conversations, where Dr. Gordon Sprung, Dr. Clayton Johnson, and Peter Davis will tell us, or will help us digest what's been said in the conference, and we'll discuss where to go from here, okay? But before you disconnect, I do want to bring my colleague, Dr. Pearl Sitnitsky here, who is a faculty at the University of Minnesota. Hi, Pearl, good morning.
Good morning, Monse.
And she has one of the honors of the conference that we are very proud of, that will be to introduce the winner of the Morrison Swine Innovator Prize. Pearl, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. If I can have my slides up. Excellent, thank you very much. So, like Monse said, my name is Pearl Sitnitsky, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota. And it is my great pleasure to introduce the winner of the Morrison Swine Innovator Prize this morning. It is an award that is really important to us. If you could move to the next slide, please. So this award is extremely important because it's our way to honor, one of the ways we honor the legacy of our dear colleague, Dr. Bob Morrison. And so with this award, we hope to encourage students to pursue work that matters for the swine industry, and to do that by learning, then by teaching us what they've learned in the conference, and also, most of all, to have fun while they're doing it. So we are trying to support the students that want to have an impact in the swine industry and be the next generation of leaders in our industry. We want them to be innovative, to have problem-solving skills, and to let us know the innovation that they come up with. This award is a teamwork. I am the face of the prize for you this morning, but we could not get it done without our sponsors. So thank you, sponsors, for helping us and supporting the students. But also, I want to take a minute to thank the members of the jury, our swine practitioners, and members of the industry that kindly gave their time to judge our students. It was not an easy job. Next slide, please. Because we had really great presentations. So we had 7 finalists and presentations that are still available on the platform to watch if you want to do so. Just click on past presentation, and that session was on Saturday afternoon. And so as you can see, we had great variety of students from various universities across the United States, and topics ranging from Lawsonia intracellularis, to defogging and things like that. So I really encourage you to take a look at those presentations. And so now, without further ado, next slide, please. I would like to introduce you to our winner, who is Zach Talbot from the University of Illinois. So congratulations, Zach. Zach talked about the biosecurity box, a very innovative way to disinfect items that will get into the farm, and he's doing it very innovatively and actually pursuing his idea further by creating this box, and he has a patent pending for it. So we cannot wait to see the biosecurity box coming up to life in the near future. Zach is winning the prize for the 2nd year in a row, so congratulations to you. I would like to also encourage you, students who are watching, or mentors who are planning to have students, to submit your work for next year iteration of the Morrison Swine Innovator Prize. And like Monse said, we are now going to take a short break and come back to our breakout session at 11. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pearl. Congratulations, Zach. And again, take a few minutes for a break, and we'll see you back after the break. Join us.